Hello and welcome to another episode of Chats with Chip. I am your host, Chip Griffin, and my guest today is Jeremy Jackson. He is the founder of Shift Lab. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, Chip.
It is great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. But before we dive into the topics at hand, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and Shift Lab?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm the founder of Shift Lab. I started the company back in 2012, so we're now kind of entering our ninth year. My personal background is both in technology. I started developing for the web in the mid 1990s, and then went to school for graphic design. So, I think my kind of niche in this industry is really being able to bring this design and technology focus together into an agency model.
And so that's one of the things I want to talk about is, how you bring those together. And in particular, I know that you partner with a lot of other agencies on projects, and I think it'll be interesting to explore a bit just, how those partnerships work, because a lot of agencies may informally use partnerships, but I think they can be a real growth and capabilities tool for agencies to leverage.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been the model for me and in my thinking in starting this agency where, we see this sort of boom towards this smaller agency model. And with that comes, a large degree of specialization. So maybe you do only design or maybe you do only development, which is, what Shift Lab does. Mm-hmm. And, you need to reach out to partners to extend that specialization and essentially become full service. And that's really been, very much our model where we want to create meaningful partnerships with other agencies to extend their capabilities and work in truly collaborative ways.
Mm-hmm. And did this movement towards partnerships, is this something that you did strategically, or is it something that just sort of came together because someone came to you and said, hey, we do design work, can you do some dev work? Talk to me a little bit about how that started to take place for your business.
Sure. Part of it was a hypothesis for sure. And the other part was a bit of strategy where, I was working with a product company called Method in New York City. I think what made me a good fit for companies like that was that design and development background that I that I bring to the table. And that really helped me to start to figure out real processes in how designers and developers really should work together. And, I think, probably many of us who've built digital products have seen this sort of butting of heads of designers and developers, or, things getting flubbed in development phases and handoff and things like that. And I was able to really figure out processes for creating real collaborative and iterative processes that I thought that I could take and transfer into an agency of its own, because I felt that there would be an appetite for that in the industry. Mm-hmm. And, what I've proven over the last 8 years, that I think that's true, that, people are tired of just backing up a bit. I mean, I think it's kind of amazing how different of a mentality design and development is, but yet they must exist together to actually be able to launch anything.
Right.
So, I really think that there was definitely an appetite for solving that. And that's really what the premise of creating the agency was all about.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine the fact that you have experience with both design and development is particularly helpful. I mean, I've run teams of designers and teams of developers and teams that have had both. And while they often butt heads because they have different motivations, shall we say, but they share similarities in that they are very creative in their own way, and they tend to be, they have their own ideas, shall we say, right? So I think the fact that you've got some experience on both sides must help you navigate that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I've seen over the years, designers being like, hey, the developers didn't really implement this to our vision, and kind of under this guise that maybe they're lazy, right? But what I've learned over time is that they literally just don't see those details because they haven't been trained to do so.
Right.
So, and then I mean, of course, in some cases, yes, designers and developers serve different masters, but that's not the crux of the problem in my experience. It's really, creating this culture that, design thinking is critical to creating, a well-crafted digital product. And also technology and architecture and all that stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes is equally important. So I think it's kind of like the shared respect and mentality that you bring into that process.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, making sure that you're building into the time your process to like make sure that both sides points of view are being heard and having time to respond to that. That's, I think really where the rubber meets the road. And then I think like my personal background in having, being able to do this right brain, left brain thing that I bring into the process, like, gives me a seat at the table with the designers and gives me a seat at the table with the developers and kind of sort of helps me make sure that process, the wheels are greased, so to speak, and that the process runs smoothly and that all that stuff is being accounted for.
Right. Well, and the fact of the matter is, the more that you can speak the language of each side and you can understand what's driving them to where they're going, that that helps you sort of navigate that and find the best solution to go forward.
Yeah, and simply put, I mean, I usually just say, hey, design in the absence of development is sort of pointless, and the inverse is true, right? And just kind of leave it at that. And I think both sides are like, yeah, we get that.
Yeah. Now, obviously, it's challenging to work with both sides when it's all under one roof. But now you're talking partnerships where you work with design firms. So how do you work that through? Does the design firm drive things and the developers tend to do more of the implementation? Is it a true partnership? Talk to me a little bit about how you work with other agencies.
Yeah, we've seen it work every way over the years,
and probably I think, not work some ways, right?
Yeah, sure. I think overall the biggest thing that we need alignment on when we take on a project is really process, because that's the thing that guarantees the predictability and the quality in the final product, right? So without the process, the wheels really fall off the wagon. And if you go in and you're trying to force a process on somebody who doesn't want it, it just doesn't work. So that's the main thing that we look for when we look for partnerships direct with businesses or with other agencies, is making sure that we all understand how we're going to get there. Mm-hmm. And the second thing really is, especially in an agency to agency model, is really understanding what the roles are. What we found doesn't work is like shared responsibilities with project management, right? Or like project management by committee doesn't work. So you really do need to designate people and make sure that the roles are very clear. And then what I found too, where, maybe we're being contracted by, let's say, a design firm who has already been working with a client, of just asking directly, hey, what role do you want us to serve here? Do you want us to take over all tech conversations? Do you want us to be a silent partner? We've worked in all of those different models. And I think, the biggest thing is just that transparency and setting up the boundaries and what the roles and responsibilities are from the jump.
Yeah. And I think you've made a number of good points in there. The process one is important. I think even when it's just an agency and a client, a single agency and a single client, process matters, but certainly once you start bringing multiple agencies into the mix, that matters. But I really like what you're saying about roles, because one of the things that I always tell my clients is, if you have more than one person in charge, nobody's in charge. Right. And so, you need to doesn't matter who you pick to some degree, you just need to pick one person so that, everybody knows that that's who you work through on a particular process.
Yeah, I think there are many, I think, technical agencies out there that are basically like, hey, you hire us and we just we're chameleon in your process. And I've found that just doesn't work for us. And one of the reasons it doesn't work for us is that we typically do pretty complex builds. Mm-hmm. We're doing things that are really unique to the businesses and things like that. And once again, back to process, it's that is the thing that guarantees the outcome. Right. So, making sure that everybody drinks that Kool-Aid on the Agile side is super important.
Right. Now, you talk too about the sort of communication with the client and how you do it different ways. Sometimes it may be where you have direct communication with the client. Sometimes you work a little bit more behind the scenes with the other agency. I mean, do you see a difference in how those work, or can they all work as long as you've got a good process in place?
I think they can all work. I think that for smaller agencies and ones that specialize, sometimes we do get disqualified because it's a multi-agency partnership. So we get disqualified from some opportunities because, sometimes businesses just, as they say, one throat to choke, right? They don't want to be dealing with the risk of having multiple agencies. I see that becoming less and less of a concern in recent years. but it still does pop up from time to time. So sometimes we are sort of faced with this, invisible partnership, and while it can work, it sort of ignores the fact of why you brought on a technical agency in the first place, right? And it's because you don't have that expertise. So if you're really trying to pass through these conversations, especially when you're talking about really detailed and technical matters that you're not well positioned to talk about, it is a little bit of a strange relationship. The ones where we think it really does work best is kind of this triangle where it's the technical team, it's the design agency, and it's the business, the stakeholders, and we all have to work together in a transparent fashion. And I think in a certain degree, like all of these groups serve slightly different masters, right? They have different areas of expertise and they care about different things. But if you're able to create this culture and working relationship on transparency and communication and accountability, things work really well. And I think that everybody's needs are well known, and you can communicate them clearly and really check all the boxes and make sure that everybody's happy. And that's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked a bunch about the client service aspect of working with another agency. Let's talk about the business side of it. Do you typically have your own contract directly with the client? Does each agency, work directly with the client, or, does one end up being a sub to the other? How does that work?
It works anyway.
Yep.
I mean, I would say contracting directly with the business is probably the most common use case, but
Yep.
it is definitely not uncommon for us just to contract under an agency and things like that. We're very happy doing either, as long as, like I said, the parameters are set up for success.
Right. And the agencies that you partner with, do you have independent arrangements with them, or there referral fees? Do you have your own sort of mutual agreements, or is it really just sort of an ad hoc kind of approach to winning business?
It sort of runs the gamut. We have talked about referral fees over the years with a few agencies, but none of that stuff has really ever come to fruition. In some cases where somebody partners with us, maybe they mark our fees up. We wouldn't really know. But yeah, I think in most cases it's sort of ad hoc, and people come to us most commonly when, again, they have like a really specific business case that they need to solve, where they need to use technology to challenge or to solve some scale problem or unique business challenge that is preventing the growth of the business. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, I think it's really our process and the way that we think about things that wins us the work, right? We usually come in and we try to make sure that we're like, hey, try to make people feel like they can really trust us by illustrating that we can solve their problem from A to Z. Right. And making sure that we're like, hey, these guys have a plan. They know how to approach this. So that's really what wins us business more than any other kind of specific arrangement that we have with any organization.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the kinds of projects that you all work on. I mean, what kind of development work do you do? Is it websites? Is it apps? Is it web applications? Talk a little bit about that if you could.
Sure. It's all those things. We do plenty of like content managed websites and things like that, responsive websites. We do those. That was what I might consider bread and butter projects when we first started in our first few years. And then we sort of, scaled up and extended out to far more complex things, e-commerce systems, specifically e-commerce systems that have very specific logistics challenges. So, we work with a bunch of different e-commerce stores where, there's drop shipping from all these different locations, or things are built to order, things like that. And those projects become more about helping that team scale better, right? How do they scale their business? And we become really adept at coming into upstart businesses and helping them look at their business model and figure out where their scale challenges will be as they grow. Mm-hmm. And then the idea is to make an MVP type investment, get it out there, and then stay ahead of that scale curve so that they can grow on schedule. Mm-hmm. That's been, something people reach out to us time and time again for. Mm-hmm. And then we've been taking on a lot of, very, very interesting work in the last 2 or 3 years that is more in the healthcare space. So patient advocacy groups using machine learning technologies to help patients get better access to care by using, some of their medical data or diagnosis history to connect them to clinical trials or, resources that will help them learn more about a rare disease or what have you. And then we've been working with a genetics lab in Europe too, to help them process genomics data and use machine learning tools to create reports and, to help advance the science in the lab to really get better insights on this huge, massive data that they have from all this genetics, the genetics kits that they've sent out.
Right. Now let's talk a little bit about your team, and obviously most agencies have experienced change in how they work with their teams in the last few months. I'm not sure why. I think things have been pretty quiet in the world around us. But talk a little bit about the team. I know you have multiple locations. How is your team set up? How was it set up, I suppose, and then how is it set up today?
Yeah, so we're about a 20-person team right now, and our headquarters is in New York City. And we opened a second office, I would say, about 4 years ago in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So we're all on the East Coast. We're all in the same time zone, right. A couple hours away. And one of the things that we did from the start of the company was we did this remote work Mondays and Fridays. We've always done that. So 40% of our time we're working remote anyway. And I'd say between having the two separate offices and this culture of remote that we've had since day one, we've really kind of just business as usual in a lot of ways in terms of our internal working relationship, through this COVID situation, which is I know a lot of agencies that are now like struggling to deal with the economic damage, right? But also trying to figure out how to work together at the same time. And that must be really difficult. So I'm grateful that we don't have to deal with that. Mm-hmm.
So obviously the fact that you were set up that way has helped in a time like this, but how does with a distributed team and working part-time in the office and part-time remotely, even before this, how does that work when you're partnering with other agencies? Have you had to, do you do a lot of in-person meetings with the agencies you partner with, or has that always been remote?
Yeah, we do in-person meetings when it's convenient. I wouldn't say that it's a critical aspect to how we work. Just to illustrate that point, I think probably 40% of our business is in Silicon Valley. So, okay. I visit there regularly, but remote is just a huge piece of the puzzle in terms of how we work in general.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have, I would imagine you use a lot of collaboration tools to make sure that you and the other agencies are staying on track. Does it one of those things where you have one project management tool that everybody kind of shares? Does each agency have their own and then you sync up in meetings? Talk a little bit about sort of the mechanics of that, because I know a lot of folks are always interested in trying to figure out the best approach to project management when they're working with others.
Yeah, we have a suite of tools that we use, a lot of the usual suspects. I don't know that anyone has any project management tools. We're like, hey, I love this.
Yes.
But
you just have ones that you hate less, right? And so that's the one that you pick.
It's just a pick your poison scenario.
Right.
But we use the usual suspects, Zoom, Slack, right? Just for day-to-day ephemeral communications, yep. Right? And for decision documentation, things like that, we use Confluence. For managing our development process, we use Jira. Yep. And then for client communications, we often use Basecamp, just as a replacement for email to make sure that people aren't getting left off of right. CC lists or anything like that. To make sure that everybody has equal access to all the information, right. And that we have an easily searchable record. Right. Of decisions or, right. Any of that stuff.
And you can always find the most current version if you're using Basecamp versus email, where it's like, well, was it the June 10th email or the June 6th email was the most recent?
Yeah, it's like, with all this stuff and in anything, even a project with just a modest level of complexity, it's really hard to build it. And there's just a lot of conversations and a lot of decisions that need to be made to get it out in the world. Right. And I think I have a pretty good memory, but it really tests you when you're getting in, you're like, yeah, I remember having this conversation 3 months ago, but what was the outcome? You need to have a place to search for that and make sure these conversations just don't die, mm-hmm. or you just wind up having the same conversations over and over again.
Right. Now, at this point, do you have sort of a suite of other agencies that you typically work with? Are you consistently adding to the roster? Are you out actively looking for more agencies to partner with?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's really fun to find new agencies to work with, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's challenging too to, you know, create working relationships with people. We have many agencies that we just partner with over and over and over
Sure.
again. And one thing that I think is really interesting just about the industries, like the difference between the design and the development industries, is that, you know, the relationships are totally different, right? A design agency may come in and be asked to solve a problem. And once that problem's solved visually, their involvement kind of fizzles out, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least from a full-time perspective.
Sure.
But the timeline on a technical relationship is much longer. So in that regard, I think it makes sense to have, you know, two different business models and keep them separate if you don't want to become a full service agency. And so sometimes what might happen is an agency comes to us and we contract through them, and then for the longer term effort or maintenance or, you know, whatever, then the contract may shift over to us.
Right.
And then the relationship might be like, okay, well, they have a design ask. We go back to the agency and then we pull them into our contract. So it's a really symbiotic relationship for a lot of the agencies we work with. And I think that we found a way to really make it work very well
Mm-hmm.
on both sides of the table.
Well, I think you make a great point there about, you know, how technical relationships, you know, tend to be more ongoing, particularly these days. I mean, I was involved with development work 25 years ago, and it was very different in the late 90s, where you would typically build something and then, you know, sort of it's fire and forget almost. But now a lot more of the development work is ongoing because expectations from users or clients, or the companies that agencies are working for, just expect to continue to evolve the product over time.
Yeah, and I think we look at, like, you know, over the past 20 years of web work and agencies and things like that, you see this kind of boutique agency, small specialized agency model is kind of born out of this idea of, you know, these many early agencies were design firms, and then, you know, the web came and they started trying to become full service, and they needed to hire way more developers than they had designers,
Right.
right, to fulfill that work. And then all of a sudden they're a tech company, but they never wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, again, the specialization that we're seeing makes a lot of sense in that regard too.
Mm-hmm.
Where then you look at the difference in the business models and you know, the areas of expertise that you need and the leadership that you need to support a full service team like that. It's a much different thing than what the original vision was for the company.
Mm-hmm. And as we look to bring this conversation to a close, you know, one of the things I think would be interesting to hear from you is, you know, what are the characteristics of a good agency partnership? You know, so when you're looking at someone to partner with, or someone comes to you proposing a partnership, how do you evaluate them? What things are you looking for in those other agencies to know that it's going to be a good relationship?
Yeah, for me, just to boil everything down, for me, starting Shift Lab was just simply about doing good work with good people. And that I try to, you know, really make that a continuous part of our ethos year in and year out. And so what we want to do is just build beautiful products, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to partner with people who are very talented. I think as a company, we love really good conceptual design. And so if there is an agency out there that is doing that type of work, like, we want to know you.
Right.
So that is kind of the main thing, is like, okay, like, are we going to get to build something interesting with this group? And if the answer is yes, we're eager to explore it. And then, you know, all the things that I talked about from process and things like that earlier totally apply, right? Those are follow-up parts of that conversation to make sure that there's a good, healthy fit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because the collaborations, and a healthy collaboration just doesn't happen by accident. It really takes a village.
Takes work. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, great, Jeremy. This has been a great conversation. If someone wants to learn more about you or Shift Lab, where should they go online?
Well, they can start at our website, shiftlab.co. We post work and, you know, industry thoughts and happenings. And we've been doing this Talk to a Leader series where we do Q&A with interesting people. And, you know, there's links to also our social media on our website. So it'd be a great place to start.
Fantastic. Well, great. I really appreciate your time. You've had some great insights for agency leaders. Again, my guest today has been Jeremy Jackson, the founder of Shift Lab.
Thanks, Chip. Thanks for having me.